Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's Business Success Series presented by Manulife. Today, we'll be talking new leaders, revitalizing Waterloo's tech community. My name is Ian McLean. I'm the President and CEO of the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that we do live and work on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples, as we seek a renewed relationship based on a foundation of mutual understanding and respect. As participants in today's virtual event, we are coming together as one. We believe everyone is free to be their true self and receive the same respect and opportunity, regardless of age, ethnicity, gender, culture, identity, sexual orientation, beliefs, or language. We hope you will join us in fostering a positive environment here today that is a safe and welcoming space for all. We know there is more that we can do, and we are committed to listening, learning, and growing as we go. Today's session would not be possible without the continued support of our sponsors and partners. So a special thank you today to our title sponsor for the Business Success Series, Manulife, our platinum sponsor for the series, our friends at the Immigration Partnership of Waterloo Region, and November sponsor, the Waterloo Economic Development Corporation. These organizations are committed to supporting our local economy and providing businesses with the resources and tools they need to thrive. I'd now like to welcome Andrew Coogler. He's Vice President, Small Business and Group Benefits Canada with Manulife Canada, to say a few words. Andrew.
Thanks, Ian. Good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure to help open up this panel on revitalizing Waterloo's tech community. I was born in the region. I'm a graduate of the University of Waterloo, and as a result, I have many friends and colleagues that work in the tech sector within the community. Further, it is wonderful to sponsor the session on behalf of Manulife, who is also very engaged and supportive of this growing and oh so important sector. In fact, Manulife and Communitech recently spearheaded a coalition supporting the future of work that is aimed at giving digitally enabled employers a leg up in this increasingly competitive space. So thank you for attending. And please enjoy the panel. And Ian, over to you.
Well, thanks so much, Andrew, and for your continued support, along with Manulife and your colleagues for the support of this series. Just before the session starts, I'd like to go over a few quick reminders. Please ensure that your microphone is muted throughout the presentation so we can reduce any background noise. If you have a tech-related question, please comment in the chat section, and a rep from my team will be back to you momentarily. If you have a question for today's speaker, it will be gathered throughout the session, and our speakers will do the best they can to answer those questions during the presentation. And all attendees will be sent a recording of today's presentation, and it will also be made available on the Greater KW Chamber website. I'd like now to introduce today's guests, Chris Albinson, Jay Krishnan, and Tony Lamantia. Chris Albinson is the new President and CEO of Communitech. He is also a co-founder and managing director of Breakaway Growth Fund. Albinson has been an early investor in companies that have created 45 billion plus in value, including Pinterest, DocuSign, Newbridge Networks, and Juniper Networks. Chris is currently on the board of Senso.ai and is an investor in numerous companies. In addition, Chris is a mentor and advisor for startups, Garage Capital, SaaS North, Canadian Innovation Exchange Top 20, among others. And previously, Chris was a general partner at JP Morgan Partners and a general partner and founder of FCC. Chris also helped grow 4 startups and most recently as Chief Strategy Officer for Digital Island and Newbridge Networks. Jay Krishnan is a globally successful entrepreneur, investor, and innovation ecosystem builder and Chief Executive Officer at the Accelerator Center. An executive leader with over 20 years experience, Jay boasts an impressive resume of international success, with experience spanning the venture capital space, entrepreneurship, and product development, as well as management. So Jay knows firsthand what it takes to turn a good idea into a great one and to grow a company from a startup to a globally competitive business. Having been involved in the founding stages of 3 startups himself, he has experienced the full startup lifecycle from failure to success, spanning seeding, raising capital, scaling, and exit, with one company ultimately acquired by a multinational conglomerate. Prior to his entrepreneurship journey, Jay donned product management and product engineering hats at global multinationals, including Cisco, Juniper, and Cantata Dialogic in the US and India. And moderating today's discussion is our good friend, Tony Lamantia. Of course, Tony is the president and CEO of the Waterloo Region Economic Development Corporation, a University of Waterloo alum. Tony has had ties to the community for decades before helping to found Waterloo EDC as the organization's inaugural leader in 2016. A community builder at heart, he relishes the opportunity to work with businesses, civic leaders, governments, and organizations like chambers of commerce and the tech ecosystem as anchors to help build a strong, sustainable economy for the people of Waterloo Region. Tony is the past chair of the Business and Economic Support Team for Waterloo Region, the partnership created to advocate on behalf of local business community during the COVID-19 crisis, and is currently a member of its leadership team. A passionate leader, his career has spanned the public, private, and nonprofit sectors with executive roles in investment marketing, technology, sales, and mining, as well as the province of Ontario, where he was an ADM of investment and industry. So thank you to all of you for joining us today. Over to you, Tony.
Thank you for passing the baton, Ian. So this is a very cool moment for me. It's one of those professional circle of life moments because about 6 years ago this time, I was reintroducing myself to the ecosystem and to the leadership across different organizations in Waterloo Region. And here we are 6 years later. It feels like 5 minutes and I've aged 10 years kind of thing. So, but anyway, now it's your turn. And why don't we just dive right in? Look, you're both coming from, I don't want to say far afield, because I know Chris in particular, you've been connected to the community for a while through C100. But Jay, you're joining us right now from Bangalore. So that's pretty far afield, although you did spend some time in the Bay Area. Starting with Chris and then over to Jay, kind of what were your initial perceptions of the ecosystem? What attracted you here, and how has that met with what you've actually seen in the last couple of months?
Big loaded question, Tony, but I'll give it a crack to kick us off. And I'm a Kingston kid originally. I think more importantly to the bio and probably even more important to this conversation, lived on Dawson Street when I was in college. I wasn't smart enough like Andrew to go to University of Waterloo, so I just got to Western, but I did have a job that had me here, and enjoyed the bomb shelter and all the other fun stuff that the community had, and as a kid worked on the farm in Strathroy, where the family hails from originally. So thrilled to come back home, and it really feels that way. It's such an amazingly welcoming community. I wrote a post about 18 months ago, just talking about this really interesting thing that was happening that we really doesn't happen very often, really once in a generation, where you see a seismic shift where all of innovation, the fountainhead of all of innovation globally was, and it used to be in Boston in the mid 90s. They kind of got a little rigid, kind of lost their way, and the Valley kind of snatched that brass ring away from them. And I was observing that the Valley was really starting to have those same issues that Boston had. It was getting rigid. It wasn't, as conducive for immigrants to come and build. And having come back to the Waterloo region so often over the last 10 years, and working with Ian Klugman and Pearl Sullivan when she was dean, just amazing energy and ethos that I think we all experienced, but it seemed like there was something else happening. It seemed like the ambition was changing. The vision of success was changing. What big was starting to change. And I think in Ontario, the first example of that was Shopify getting to $1 billion in revenue faster than any company before or since on the planet. I think that was the starting gun. Our founders, whether or not it's eCentire or MyoVision, or I think the folks over at Applyboard just found out last night, just crossed over 1,500 employees here now valued well over $4 billion. You could kind of feel it coming, 18 months ago. And I remember having Martin Bashir at my cottage and just meeting him, and you kind of oh my God, that's one of those entrepreneurs, that have come to Canada to go build really big things. So I was really excited by that. That's what kind of brought me And I was privileged to have backed some amazing founders like Dave Caputo and Mark Morin when they did Pickstream, and then Sandvine locally, Tom Donnelly. When I was doing the proverbial walk in the snow in February, they said, "Hey, it's time to come home and really lean in and help us build the barn and make it really big," which I was excited to do. So that was all I could see it coming. I was excited about coming. When the board hired me, to answer your question about what surprised me a little bit, the board said, "Hey, look, by 2025, it'd be really cool if we had 24,000 tech workers in Waterloo region. And the other thing that'd be really cool is if we had $1 billion a year invested in all the companies." What I'm about to say had nothing to do with me, had everything to do with guys like Ian and Tony and Ian Klugman and Andrew. They've been working really diligently for the last 6+ years, but we just crossed 26,000 tech workers 4 weeks ago, fully 4 years ahead of schedule. And as of this week, our companies have raised $2.2 billion in the last 11 months. To put that in context, that's as much was raised in the previous 10 years combined. So I knew it was awesome. I knew the people were amazing. I knew the potential was there. The speed of the exponential growth has surprised me. I'll be honest about it, but I think it's really exciting. I just came out of a meeting with Chair Redmond, Vivek, the other new guy in town, our new president at University of Waterloo. And I think we're all kind of collectively excited about the opportunity, but also realizing we need to work together, the chambers, the hospitals, to really, make sure that we're able to execute on this exponential growth that's in front of us. It's most systems in most cities are kind of set up to deal with linear growth, and we're experiencing exponential growth. And I think we want to avoid some of the mistakes that San Francisco and other places, when they had exponential growth, didn't think it all the way through and couldn't react. So anyways, that's a lot of answer to your first question. I'll turn it over to Jay, who's a dear friend, and I'm excited for him to be here with us. I understand shortly.
Jay, over to you.
Yeah, no, firstly, thanks. Thank you, Tony and Ian, for this opportunity. The easy answer, of course, is everything that Chris said. And that would be cheating, because I don't have the background to some of the fun stuff that he's had the privilege of doing. So I guess to answer your question, Tony, I was in the formative years of my career, I was in Boston, and quite like what Chris alluded to, I did see the perils of that ecosystem as it went from one place to another. And then towards the end, I spent some time in the Valley, same story there. And then I ended up in Bangalore. One of the things I realized for an ecosystem to thrive is really 3 things coming together: momentum, diversity, and density. And in my case, I'm a little less altruistic in the sense that I wanted to do this for myself. And I figured, looking across, Waterloo had all these supply side economics perfectly lined up. Great university town, fantastic talent, great ecosystem from the RIM/BlackBerry days. Tech talent is globally #1, if not in the top 3. So all things on the supply side were terrific. What can we do specifically on the demand side to drive growth? And to Chris's point, I think we're at the cusp of the trajectory, which is exponentially taking off. And if we can play a collective role as ecosystem players and enable that growth, nothing like it. And I think to add to those 3 dimensions, the momentum, the diversity, and the density is really where I think we can put on our collective hats and drive the ecosystem. So I think that's kind of been my perception.
Yeah, so Jay, I'm going to continue with you for this next segment. So obviously with your CEO hat for the Accelerator Center, new CEOs there's pretty much 2 agendas for kind of for a CEO at an organization that's got an existing history. It's either a steady as she goes agenda or a change agenda, right? And I know both you and Chris have adopted pretty ambitious change agendas. Why don't you, take some time and walk us through the anchor pieces of the change agenda for the Accelerator Center, and Chris, you can follow. Go ahead, Jay.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely, Tony. I think the beauty of where we are today is on the heels of what our predecessors have done a spectacular job of, right? So that makes the foundation to build on easy. So the new vision that we put out, called Vision 2025, which is publicly available, really has three key ingredients to it. So the first ingredient was to try and address the question as to why. Why do we need a new vision? Why do we need a new direction? And the answer, depending on whoever we asked, came back to the same thing, and that is to place the region at the epicenter of everything that we do. So to me, that became the purpose of this new vision. So placing the Kitchener-Waterloo area at the epicenter of everything was objective number one, and that addressed the question as to why. The second circle, concentric circle around it, was to address, all right, that's great. How are we going to do what we need? And that answered the mission of what we wanted to articulate, and that was really to put things in perspective as far as building the organization to achieve growth for the region is concerned. And the last piece was, well, if you do all this, where do we end up? And that is really the vision, right? Sort of looking forward and trying to predict the future. Can we create a full stack hub with programming at its core so that everything in the community, everything that we do to accelerate startups, and everything we do to take startups globally, as well as attract Martin Baseries out there globally to the Waterloo region? And combining all that is why we have this new vision called Vision 2025. So really, Waterloo at the center, Kitchener-Waterloo, the region at the center, everything that we do to ascertain ourselves as a full stack hub to enable the growth, and all the key ingredients and strategic pillars to drive that is really the tenets of our new vision.
Good stuff. Chris, how do we continue to own the podium, and how do you see us replicating that, modeling that in the months and years ahead?
Yeah, no, happy to kind of jump on there. So I guess similar to Jay, we had an amazing foundation, and just hats off to Ian Klugman, who's has always been a dear friend, as I say to him, my brother from another mother. But all the things that he built, just an amazing place, amazing team. And together we basically went back to, who do we serve? And so we talked to 1,100 founders coast to coast across the country, the vast majority of them, being, in the Waterloo region. And we said, look, what's getting in your way? And to your point on Own the Podium, I think there's this really exciting moment, very similar to 2002 when the Canadian women beat the American women for the first time, our first gold medal in hockey in 50 years. Not only was that awesome, I was there, a best hockey game I've ever seen in my life. But the interesting thing was the athletes themselves were like, why are we not winning more often? We should be winning more often. And that was, translated by Kathy Priestner, Canadian we don't celebrate nearly enough, who said, yes, not only why are we not, but why are we not? And Kathy was a mother of On the Podium. And so not just as the bumper sticker of it, the whole methodology of how do we find Canadian founders that have the probability of success, not the possibility of success, and look at the things that are getting in their way. The number one problem our founders are having is talent. The number two challenge they're having is talent. The number three challenge they're having, is talent. I was pleased to be with the premier in the Waterloo region yesterday. He was really explicit about it, which I loved, just saying, Ontario is not only open for business, it's open for talent. And bringing more talent in, is absolutely, I think, paramount. One of the challenges we have on the talent side, to connect some dots, is, when you think Seattle, you think Amazon, you think Microsoft. And 20 years ago, when you said Waterloo, you thought OpenText and BlackBerry. Right. But we haven't been able to kind of connect those founder journeys, those successful companies, to the brand of the region in the same way that if you're walking, and we have the Consul General from Israel here in the building right now, and if you're walking the streets in Tel Aviv, do they know who we are, what we're good at, and what our founder stories are? So we need to do a better job of marketing. And I think the cool thing is we built a huge data layer to basically systemically identify the 1% highest performing private companies on the planet that happen to be Canadian. Why does that matter? So that I can sit in front of the Consul General from Israel and say, Jay, from East Entire is in the 1% highest performing private companies on the planet. And by the way, that company started in Waterloo. It grew here. It's now over 1,200 employees. Apply Board is in the 1% highest performing private companies on the planet that started here, now over 1,500 employees from 68 different countries, speaking 72 different languages, all built here in Waterloo. And so we're really close, I guess, is maybe another way to answer your question on the podium. Like that podium's right in front of us. It's our opportunity, to Jay's point, to lose. And I'm just really excited to be here working with all of you to go make it happen. We got a great team on the ice. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I love the metaphor. I often, when I think about the ecosystem, center ice is right here, in my view. Jay, let me ask you, how do you envision working together with organizations like Communitech and UW Velocity, the university, the college, and how do you contemplate driving that change agenda so that it's on everybody's front burner? And I ask because Chris did a really good job kind of focusing in on the talent challenge that we have, and it's not just Waterloo region, but issues like the Great Resignation, with kind of an increasing focus on getting talent from anywhere and everywhere, and improving immigration streams and the global talent stream to include like even skilled trades. Like, how does this burning issue change how you work with other members of the ecosystem? And by the way, is it accentuated? Is the urgency something that you think will help with engagement?
Yeah, I know it's a great question, Tony. And I think it's important to address it, right? Largely because the purpose of what we all do falls back on the development of an ecosystem, right? As opposed to it being a Google versus Facebook conversation. So that makes it easy, right? But the difficulty, of course, is to figure out positioning in a way that our entrepreneurs understand what each one of us does. And largely, there have been overlaps, but going forward, there will be overlaps. And the good news is, between the university, Velocity, Communitech, and ourselves, we've started to engage and have conversations. So which is good. The challenge, I think, is going to be, as we go forward, how do we articulate positioning and make sure that the sum of 2 + 2 is 5 and not 4. So that's one part of the equation. Just to dig a little deeper into building of ecosystems. Typically, ecosystem build-outs, number one, takes time, and number two, it happens in cycles. I mean, we've seen the Silicon Valley go through it, right from the inception of radar to semiconductor to mainframes, etc. Boston's been through the same. In India, I've actually been through the privilege of seeing that happen in 3 cycles as short as 10 years. So the good news for us is that we have all the ingredients to hit it out of the park in a much potentially shorter time. And in my head, I think it's 5 years. Specific to the organization at the AC, we're focusing on 3 things to make that happen. The biggest one is, how do we go global? Again, focusing on the supply side, tech, IP, innovation, access to university talent, access to scale-up entities like Communitech. We are very sorted, right? What's missing is market access. And I think the key piece there, which we intend to work on, is the ability for our founders to seek capital in the form of revenue and/or in the form of investments into the region and into the portfolio companies. And number 2, the flip of it. How can we instrument the startup visa program to our advantage so that we end up drawing the best founders out there in the world to Canada, to Waterloo, Kitchener, in this case through the AC's Startup Visa program. So I think to us, that is such a key pillar, which answers a bunch of questions, right? It addresses the diversity piece, the inclusivity piece. It addresses the whole density and diversity piece. And all that goes towards building the ecosystem. And the third piece, how do we work together? The core of what we do specifically is programming through a structured mechanism. One of the things we just kicked off is, while we keep the programming tenets intact, can we layer it with a fair amount of flexibility so founders can pick and choose what they want as opposed to being stuck in the program? But what happens after? And I think that's where a deeper, meaningful conversation / engagement with community comes in. So can we be the vehicle that hands off the curated best, the filtered few, and the best in class to community, which can then scale these organizations and not spend cycles doing what we intend to do? So I think that's the easy one. With Velocity, I think it's going to be a bit of a parallel. And with the university, depending on the persona, if it's a founder versus a serial entrepreneur versus an industry expert versus a researcher / faculty member, can our program sound the flexible co-working style program address what they specifically need before we hand them over to community? So that's sort of the way I'm seeing it. Of course, the details always in the execution, but the good news is we all have intent to make it happen.
Chris, when you think about the collaboration blueprint, we all want to be speaking the same language, but what do you think that looks like in the months and years ahead?
Yeah, so I'll maybe pick up on Jay's point as it relates to how we work with, and was just talking to Vivek from the university. We'll pick on that up, but also maybe a little bit broader too, if I could. So Jay and the AC have run really awesome programs, intensive programs, building some of the best founders that we've got in sort of these cohorts of 40 companies at a time, and building them up. And then to Jay's point, when they get to a level, it's really about helping them scale. So like two quick examples. I was with Amran, founder of IntelliJoint, last night. I love IntelliJoint, awesome company. Was really forged at the AC and now expanding and growing really quickly, and a great example of a company really changing healthcare delivery. They cannot get bought in the province of Ontario. And so was with the Premier last night, with the Minister of College and Education, with the Minister of Economic Development, saying, look, if our companies can't have local customers when they're selling into the SUNY New York healthcare system or in the UC system in California, and they get asked, like, this is great technology, can we actually go see a surgery being done at an Ontario hospital? They have to fly them to New York State. Right. East Entire, pretty similarly, securing the entire city of Chicago, but can't get procured in Ontario. The examples drive us all crazy. We all pull our hair out, but I want to say there's some great examples the other way, and we're starting to change it. And I think this is where the partnership with you, with the chamber, really come to bear. So up on my, I guess this shoulder, we've got the Can Health. We just announced a national partnership with Can Health last week. That's $40 billion of healthcare procurement across the country. And so they've curated the demand side. What are the big problems, not at one hospital, but that can, basically you prove at one place, you can sell everywhere, to help our startups, after teaching them for 25 years, like, don't bother selling in Canada, go to the US. We've got to make it easier. It's got to be easier to sell here, and should be easier to sell here than going to the US. So one of the great examples we celebrated on that announcement last week was Grand River Hospital. One of our great local hospitals was having a big issue, as all hospitals are in Canada right now, with nursing. Can't get enough trained staff, and certainly can't afford to take trained staff off the floor. And so they have this problem of, I can't take anyone off the floor, but I have to keep them getting trained, I have to keep them certified. How do you solve the problem? And so we said, with our True North list, we can identify companies that are in the 1% highest performing private companies on the planet that are Canadian that you can buy from with the same confidence that you're buying from a US multinational. And so for Grand River, we were able to say Exonify, another hometown success, Carol Lehman founded, another AC company, great company, but also in the 1% highest performing private companies on the planet. So we can like verify that status, bring that together with Grand River. And for those that aren't familiar, Exonify does real-time gamified learning on the job. And so they've had that very successfully deployed in factories and quick serve restaurants, but really hadn't penetrated healthcare. And so was able to get that deployed at Grand River, proven as a solution at Grand River, deployed for a year. And so now it's being price listed for every hospital across Canada. You can now buy it. It's a proven solution. And so for Exonify, it gets them into a new vertical and allows us to really scale out. So that's one quick example of two companies that were really well forged at the AC that we're working really hard to help them grow and stay rooted here. And we serve 1,600 companies, which we're pleased to do. But one last point on that front, because during COVID, not only did we work on those kind of things, but with you and with Ian and with the chamber, we worked on things like taking 800 co-op students from University of Waterloo and helping to train 8,200 small businesses across Southwestern Ontario how to be digital in a hurry. And what does it take? And that's the one thing I love about where we are is like we build stuff, we build big barns, and we come together to go do it. And it's just a blast. It's like, what's the solution? How do we get there? Let's go get it done.
Yeah, the ability to sell in your own state or province is critical. And I'm glad you highlighted that. You talk about IntelliJoint, but I recall even when I was representing Digital Persona and selling into Hydro One in 2003, it was just such a complicated process that you were better off just working with a vendor of record just to get in and place your product. And we definitely have to do better. And people have been talking about this for decades. If we're still talking about it 10 years from now, then I think we will have failed collectively and as a province to fix it, because we need to do a lot more. Before I pivot,
so Tony, just one quick thing. I think if we can all be on the same sheet of 15% of procurement has to go to Canadian controlled private corps. It has to be use it or lose it. Yeah. So that the dollars have to be done, and there's got to be 5% of improvement in either productivity or price, and that will build a sustained flywheel. I was talking to the premier about that last night. I know he really wants to push in on Buy Ontario. This government does. The federal government, I think, is around. Like, one of the things coming out of COVID, I think we have to realize there's a moment like when you could not get masks from Minnesota.
Oh yeah.
And so we learned that lesson. We've got to build the capacity, and to build the capacity, that means we have to buy our own stuff, and we're close. I think it's like the same way we got all together on all-way, two-way go. We need to get, and push hard on Buy Ontario and make sure it's something that's real, that works, that connects the ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. Before I switch it up a bit, somebody's either eating popcorn very loudly or I'm hearing a bunch of keystrokes and that individual may not be on mute. I think it's the latter, because I don't think they're eating popcorn watching us in action. Maybe they are, who knows? Jay, over to you. Listen, one of the things that we don't spend enough time on, I think, is looking at areas where we are particularly strong. And one of the benefits and curses of Waterloo region is that we're strong in a number of areas where technology converges. So whether it's auto tech or quantum imaging and how it converges with aerospace, med tech, clean tech, there's a lot going on, and we have the asset maps to actually prove it. But in the spirit of post-COVID tech and talking about the new partnership that Chris announced via the feds, are there some areas, whether it's molecular genomics, life sciences, Are there some areas that you particularly excited when you think about the cohort at Accelerator Center? And do you want to spend a couple of minutes telling folks why you think they're worthy of our attention and why you're excited?
Yeah, absolutely, Tony. Yeah, so oftentimes, founders excel at what they do because they pick giant problems to solve, right? And they go about doing it. I think given where we are as an ecosystem and what the companies at the AC do, I think the big opportunity in front of us is clean tech. And I say that not because of those two reasons from a microeconomic perspective, but even from a macro perspective, right? If we want to be known fast forward to 2030 as the region that did X, what better opportunity to pick than say that this is the epicenter of the universe that eventually got the climate action kickstarted through innovation, through policy change, through capital, and eventually spread to the rest of the world. So now if you play it backwards and figure out, all right, what do we do to make that happen? You obviously need those three key pillars to come together: policymakers, access to markets, access to innovation, et cetera. And I think we have all of those. The thing that I think is missing in instrumenting it is probably capital. And because climate change is such a nebulous thing, so clean tech is by itself not going to address it, right? You need to have science, you need to have engineering, you need to have storage technologies, you need to have things in mobility, compute, which goes back to quantum. And for all those things to come together, I think it needs key players like all of us to come together. So to me, I think that's the area of focus that is beginning to show promise. And I would profess and predicate that that's how we go about doing this. The second part of it is, if you again look back at places like the Valley, right? It's given birth to a ton of companies based off of one parent. Be it the traitorous 8 semiconductor story of Fairchild, or even if you look at what do LinkedIn and Uber and Tesla have in common, and they all have the PayPal parents, right? That's another way of saying, here's a giant parent that had a ton of innovation, but more importantly, a ton of interesting people who spawned a bunch of companies, and they all went in and did it for the ecosystem. So the good news for us is that we already have the flywheels of that from the BlackBerry days.
Yeah.
I think that would be my answer. The intersection of multiple areas, not just the pieces of science and engineering, but pieces of the ecosystem to try and solve things in climate change, in clean tech, addressing climate change would be my pick.
Yeah, I actually recognize that you've alluded to the visible anchors as well, and and you use Jay. I find that we don't talk about those anchors enough. A week ago, I had the president of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association talking about Project Arrow, and he was essentially opining that Waterloo region could very easily be the Canadian host for this ambitious kind of EV moonshot project with an Aero Mobility Inc. headquartered here. Chris, when we're thinking about areas like life sciences, med tech, auto tech, clean tech, are there any particular stories that get you very excited, or areas that you think we could play, and if so, why?
Yeah, I mean, going back to the on the podium metaphor, and one of the things that Kathy Priestner did was talk not only about like what are the athletes that have the probability of success, but where do you have relative competitive advantage, participation, right? So, the same way you walk the streets in Singapore or Tel Aviv or Berlin and say, what's Canada good at? And people say hockey without even thinking about it. Unfortunately, we don't really have that response on the innovation side. And we have to be realistic. We're 40 million people on a planet of 7 billion plus. Like, what are the things that we can actually do and differentiate? And so this was the hardest part of our 100-day sprint. Where we landed was a foundational technology, I think, that will affect every sector in every geography, is AI, to put a handle on it. And what are we different at I think in a world where the United States is putting $100 billion with a high degree of intentionality and AI and quantum in dual use to compete with China, that's putting over $100 billion in those same technologies in dual use, how do we compete? And I think the answer is, and this is the part that's tougher for all of us, I think, but is we have trust. If Canada has a brand, it's trust. And in a world where big tech is not trusted out of the United States and is not trusted out of China, can we be the place where trust is built right into technology? And it connects directly to what Jay was talking about. If you look at water systems, or if you look at EV and Aero, which you're talking about, AI is a core enabling technology to all of those things. If it's on the education side with what Martin Bashiri and the team are doing at Apply Board, AI is core technology. On the agricultural side, we're working with University of Guelph and a lot of different startups on smart agriculture, where machine vision connected to AI. And so I think, if there's a blueprint for this big barn that we're building, such that in 5 years, to Jay's point, you're walking in the streets of Bangalore or in Israel or in Singapore, they'd say Canada is the place where they built technology that was trusted, and that technology at its core was applied ethical AI, and that was the standard that we developed. And we've got the Israeli Consul General in the building today, and they're very excited about this idea of partnering with Canada and having us lead, frankly, a different way. Because right now the US and the Chinese are going down a very highly competitive dual use path. The Europeans are going down a path of regulate, slow down. If we can be the place where innovation comes together and at its core is trust, and all 1,600 companies that are Communitech members, sign off on the Tech for Good commitment to be a member. And I think it's something that we need to cherish, nurture, develop. And I think trust in technology becomes, our brand globally, the same way Israel Startup Nation. What does that really mean? But it means enough that, like, you say it and you know what it means, right? We need to kind of cultivate that brand. And I think this idea of trust connecting to technology, there's something big there that we can really deliver against.
Yeah, nicely put. When I think about the Tech for Good, clarion call to the world, you want to also think about how do you animate that? How do you bring it to life with real stories, real examples, and so that people immediately identify with that. And obviously, over and above tattooing Tech for Good on my chest or on our heads, there needs to be kind of a more pronounced, coherent story that we keep, marketing internationally. Question from one of our viewers that I'm going to share. So, Jay, why don't you give it a shot, and then Chris follow. Communitech and the AC exist to help companies grow and scale. Implicit in that is a continual supply of new innovations and new startups and products. So these days, given how hard it is to discover breakthrough ideas, curious about how this part of the cycle is being managed and controlled. Obviously the university and colleges play a role, but they can't be the only source for these new ideas. What are your thoughts? Jay, why don't you start with that?
Sure. Yeah, this is a terrific question. I'll try and put on my startup founder hat to address this. So if you look at, the now infamous, once famous pivot pyramid that Dave McClure put out, the pyramid talks about keeping the customers at the base of the pyramid, problem right above it, the solution right above it, the technology right above it, and right at the apex of the pyramid, having growth is probably the way to answer this, right? So another way of saying that is, we live in a world today where you don't do technology validation first, but you do market validation first. And, more than 40% of entrepreneurs who fail, contrary to public thinking that it's because they don't have capital, is really because, they build stuff that the market doesn't want. So to go back to the question, I think the best way to do it would be to figure out the supply of innovative solutions. Does it have a giant scalable market that is not only in love with this product, but it will also pay for it, is the answer to this question. And how do we foster it? Our job as an ecosystem player is to bring enough of that global demand to Chris's point that we need to look beyond the geographical boundaries of the 40 million that we have. And it is that market demand that's going to force us to think out of our box, own the podium, and develop solutions, which is again the foundation of the pyramid customer that we can take to the global audience. So to me, that is the answer. Think of the market first. We can bring the market to the region, and it's up to the region and its dynamic, fantastic entrepreneurs to build these solutions.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. This might be a good opportunity maybe to talk about Communitech Outposts, Chris, but maybe just before that, how do we keep that pipeline of new disruptive products and platforms growing? And then I think that's a nice segue when you talk about going global and how Outposts can help.
Yeah, no, happy to add on to both of those. So maybe to bring a micro to Jay's macro, we have so many amazing entrepreneurs, here and increasingly bringing more in. So Dave Caputo, founder at Pickstream and then at Sandvine, a serially successful telecom investor. When he was trying to think about like what was his next thing, he went to the senior projects, out of the University of Waterloo and listened to some of these really amazing students that we're bringing from all over the world, talking about the big problems that they're interested in, and kind of listen. So like, hey, listen, what's kind of cool there? What's interesting? Went into the labs, talked to a bunch of the profs, and kind of came out of that with not a like, wow, I want to go help build this, but it connected some dots for him. So I think the lesson out of that was us keeping the surface area open, so that you can kind of see some things, connect the patterns, and then find a big opportunity. So what's Dave building? TrustCore. He's basically reinventing drywall. And to Jay's earlier point on clean tech, it's one of the biggest contributors, from an emissions point of view, and one of the most inefficient parts of the building process after concrete. And so it's innovation that was kind of spurred from conversations from the University of Waterloo, a serially successful entrepreneur going after big problems. Drywall is about $1 trillion a year market globally. I mean, it's pretty massive, big market, to Jay's point. Seen very little innovation. TrustCore started here from Dave with that idea, now has plants in Ohio, Calgary, Palmerston, just did a really large financing, and growing pretty nicely. And so, my lesson there is, just keep the surface area open. And again, that's one of the things I love about this region is, go see the students, pitching as they're coming out of the university and what are their senior projects. I can roll up the door and walk down from Communitech into Velocity and talk to the founders in their labs. We just need to find ways to make sure that we're connecting. We keep communicating. That's the big thing. All of the things are here. We just need to keep talking. On the second part on Outpost, and this picks up on the earlier conversation of talent being one of the biggest issues. We've got this great programs from the federal government around global skills. Jay talked about Startup Visa, that we're able to kind of bring talent in globally here in a relatively short period of time. But there's still lots of time where it's more difficult to bring it in quickly. And also to Jay's earlier point, the other thing is a lot of times we need to find ways to go to the markets. And so Dave actually said, hey, Chris, you remember that thing that we did at Newbridge Networks many moons ago, where we leveraged, a bigger collective to go do things faster and cheaper? Maybe we could do that here at Communitech too. So we started something called Outposts that allows any company in the community, any Canadian company. So it could be any member of the chamber that needs to hire somebody outside of Canada, that you can do it basically in half the time at 1/8 the cost, and hire in 160 countries around the world. So we have ClearPath Robotics hiring their first employee in Japan on the platform. Exonify, that I talked about earlier, hiring new sales employees in France, Germany, and in Eastern Europe. It's a great community effort to kind of pull it together. It's available to everyone at the chamber, and I encourage you to go check it out on Communitech's web. Just do a quick Google search, Communitech Outposts. And that service is there for anyone who's looking to expand.
Good stuff. Okay, before Ian brings us home, I'm going to put you on the spot as the kind of the frosh among us, and I would like you to take 30 seconds.
No hazing.
No. 30 seconds each. No, we're not about that anymore. Thank God. 30 seconds. There must be something about you, and please share it that not many people who are watching us now would know about. So please feel free to share something about yourselves, Jay and Chris specifically, that most folks watching us right now would not know. And if pushed, I'll add as well. But Jay, why don't you start?
Thanks, Tony, for giving Chris more time to think. Just kidding. I was going to say the handlebar mustache. No, I'm just kidding. I think the thing that most folks probably don't know about me is that the reason why I didn't become another entrepreneur again is after the third startup of mine was a failure. My wife said, I think 2:1 is a good ratio to successes. Just leave it at that. I'm not funding your hobbies anymore.
Okay, great. Chris?
So I mentioned earlier, I'm a Kingston kid, and I'll date myself a little bit, but I went to a high school called KCVI, and had the privilege of being there at the same time as a band that at the time I was the first roadie for the band called the Slinks that turned into the Tragically Hip. So the factoid there is Paul Langlois, the lead guitarist, and I were schoolboy champions of curling Eastern Ontario 1986. So I don't think too many people know that.
All right, very, very cool. And listen, I've got to be able to take it and as well as dish it out. Most folks probably don't know that as a Waterloo co-op student, it took a while to get me placed because I wasn't an engineer. I was part of this arts and business program. And Ian McLean, don't say anything about taking a while to get me placed. But I spent 3 weeks until I got the gig from IBM. I spent 3 weeks selling encyclopedias door to door in Toronto. So, and most folks or some folks won't even know what an encyclopedia is. But anyway, I'll leave it there.
Hey, Tony, I got one more for you. So when I was a student from Western working in Waterloo, living on Dawson Street, I worked for Canada Post, and I sold to small businesses all over the Waterloo region. And I brought the first computer in to basically say, hey, look, you're getting ripped off by UPS, this big US company. You can actually buy from Canada Post, get your stuff there faster, easier, cheaper. So I got to see a lot of Waterloo region selling Canada Post. There's another one for you.
There you go. Awesome. Ian, bring us home.
Listen, that could be the first time ever, Chris, where you said I'm from Canada Post and I'm here to help. But it's always a first. I want to just thank you all for joining us today. Fascinating discussion. Appreciate you, busy one and all, for taking the time. Just on Outpost, which is a tremendously important opportunity for businesses, not just tech, of all descriptions. Chris is coming on Business to Business on City News 570. Powered by Cowan Insurance, which is our radio show fairly soon. But we may actually push that back because I'm more interested in having a discussion with you on the program about your curling exploits, because I'm a reformed curler as well. Jay, we're going to invite you when it's not the middle of the night where you are to come on and talk more about the Accelerator Center and your new role there and thoughts for moving forward. Just as a point of reference, Tony has worn out his welcome on Business to Business on 570. He was on so often during the start of the pandemic that we refused to have him back. I'm just kidding. Tony's always welcome.
Go find another COVID co-host, all right? Would you?
Yeah, at the rates that we were paying you, I think we would have difficulty finding that person. No, Tony was always and is always welcome on Business to Business. Listen, we're going to leave it there. That brings us to the end of today's session. I want to thank again our sponsors and partners. Our title sponsor for today is Manulife, our platinum sponsor for the series, the Immigration Partnership of Waterloo Region, and November's sponsor, Tony and the gang at Waterloo Economic Development Corporation. And to today's speakers, Jay, Chris, and Tony. Finally, to all of you for joining us today. As a reminder, We do host a new Business Success Series session every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Join us next week to hear the workforce trends that are shaping your organization's ability to attract, hire, and retain its workers. What is changing about the workforce post-pandemic, and what is making workers decide where they want to work and for whom? And also how immigration is affecting the future workforce. Charlene Hoffbauer of the Workforce Planning Board of Waterloo Region will be our guest for a fascinating discussion on the talent issue. For more details, please register and visit greaterkwchamber.com. Please do share this series with your friends and colleagues. Join us every Wednesday afternoon for another edition of the Business Success Series, brought to you by Manulife. Because if it's Wednesday, it's the Business Success Series. Thanks so much, everybody. Appreciate it.